I'm so excited about today's podcast. We should just get right into it. Why? Because our guest today is Seth Godin. You've heard of him. Now you get a chance to hear from him as we talk about his brand new book. Welcome to episode 132 of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.
Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We are here each week to talk about leadership, teamwork, organizational culture, and human potential with experts from every walk of life. Your host is Kevin Eikenberry, a best-selling author and leadership thought leader for 25 years. This episode is sponsored by Kevin's book, The Long Distance Leader: Rules for Remarkable Remote Leadership. Order your copy today at remarkablepodcast.com/book. And now, here's your host, Kevin.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Our guest today is Seth Godin. And if you haven't heard of Seth, my question would be, where have you been? Let me tell you about Seth. He's the author of 18 books that have been bestsellers around the world and have been translated into more than 35 languages. He's also the co-founder of the Alt MBA and the Marketing Seminar, online workshops that have transformed the lives and work of thousands of people. He writes about the post-industrial revolution, the way ideas spread, marketing, quitting, leadership, and most of all, changing everything. You might be familiar with his books, including Linchpin, Tribes, The Dip, and Purple Cow, all of which are on my shelf. In addition to his writing and speaking, he has founded several companies, including Yo-Yo Dine and Squidoo. His blog is one of the most popular on the web. All you gotta do is type in Seth in Google and you'll find it. In 2018, he was inducted into the Marketing Hall of Fame. His brand new book is called This Is Marketing, and we'll talk a little bit about that before we're done. Welcome, Seth, to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for doing this.
You know, it's my pleasure. And it's often, Seth, when I have someone on, I will realize that they are somebody, I've never had someone like them before. I don't know if I've had anyone before who's in the Hall of Fame, certainly not the Marketing Hall of Fame. So how does that happen? And how does that make you feel that you're in the Hall of Fame?
Well, Ted Williams was in the Fly Fishing Hall of Fame. I just need to mention that. I don't know why that's relevant, but he was.
So he was in more than one is what you're saying.
He was in one outside of his usual field of expertise. I actually love the idea of a Hall of Fame. I think that the fact that anyone can start one, that it highlights different facets of a field is magnificent. In Florida, there's a swimming Hall of Fame everywhere. So I'm in the Guerrilla Marketing Hall of Fame, the Direct Marketing Hall of Fame, and now I'm in the Marketing Hall of Fame. I'm the only person who's in all three. You don't get a big prize. You get a nice little plaque. But it meant a lot to me because I've been on the out for such a long time. They kicked me out of the Direct Marketing Association after I wrote Permission Marketing because they thought I was undermining their constitutional right to spam people. And a lot of marketers got uncomfortable with my ideas in Purple Cow that advertising isn't what it used to be. And so, my goal is to teach and to lead and not to be a year ahead of the curve, but 10 or 20 years. And so to see it come around again, I'll admit it's sort of gratifying.
Well, that's cool, man. So, I said it in the introduction, you write about a lot of different things and have written about a lot of different things. So I'm curious, how would you describe what you do? You sort of just said it a little bit, but how would you describe what you do or sort of what your role is?
Well, I notice things. And then I try to explain them in a way that when people hear me explain them, they say, oh yeah, of course, that's obvious. And I don't think I write about a lot of different things. I mean, yeah, I write about canoeing and chocolate every now and then, but generally I write about how individuals can change the culture. And in order to change the culture, and all marketing is changing the culture. In order to change the culture, you got to change something inside first. You have to believe that you don't just have the privilege, but have the ability to speak up, to make an assertion, to cause change to happen. And so the new book, the subtitle that's not on the cover is Work That Matters for People Who Care. And that's an interesting expression, work that matters, meaning this isn't just more stuff. This isn't just average stuff for average people. for people who care, meaning it's probably not for you. And if you don't care about what I just made, fine. We're okay with each other. But if you are one of those people who care, here I am. And what that requires then is that we find within ourselves the guts to state a goal, to state a direction, to make an assertion, and the generosity to then go out into the world and say, hey, everyone, I made this. Except not everyone, just the right people.
Right. And that's the key, right? Because if your market is everyone, your market is no one, right?
Correct.
And so being very clear about that, and you talk a lot about that. We'll probably come back to that. Most people, I mean, you're in 3 marketing halls of fame. We've already covered that ground. Most people would call you, or a lot of people would label you a marketing guy, and you just sort of said maybe not. And this is a leadership podcast, if you will. And so I'd like you to go a little further on what you just said. And
Sure.
how do you see the connection? Because it was very clear to me when we had the chance to do this, like, yeah, I absolutely want to have Seth on. And yet some people might say, well, wait a minute, right? What's the connection? So let's talk about
let's talk about leadership for 1 minute, because leadership and marketing are not the same thing. I'm sorry, leadership and management are not the same thing. This is very important.
We are completely in agreement. Go ahead.
Management has 2 components. 1, get people to do what they did yesterday, but faster and cheaper. It's about optimizing explored solutions. And 2, it uses authority to cause people to do something they ordinarily wouldn't want to do. If you don't have those 2 things, you can't be a manager. So we need managers. We need managers at the pacemaker factory. We need managers at McDonald's. We need managers everywhere in between. But leadership is totally different. Leadership is exploring unexplored regions, no manual, and it doesn't rely on authority. It relies on responsibility. I'm responsible. I can't tell you what to do. I can't fire you for not coming to the march, for not bringing your A game. That's what a manager might do. I'm not a manager. I'm a leader. I think we ought to go over there. I'm not exactly sure how to get over there. Who wants to come? And if that's not the work of marketing, then I don't know what it is, because that's what good marketers do. What good marketers do is they lead the people who are enrolled in the journey to a place that's a little unknown, because they have this new thing, this new idea, this new platform, some change they want to make. And so, I devote a chapter of the book to who are you trying to change? If you're not trying to change anybody, you're not a marketer.
There you go, everybody. We can stop right here because you got all you need. Yes. We're not going to stop right here, but we could stop right there, because I think that, I probably couldn't have said it the way you said it, wouldn't have wanted to have. And yet when I think about what I read and what I think about as a business owner, right, who happens to be in the business of developing leaders, I spend a tremendous amount of my time reading in both of those areas and thinking in both of those areas. And I agree, they are really connected, and I appreciate you sharing that way. As I had the chance to think about preparing for our conversation, I wanted to, when you get the chance to talk to someone who wants to think about things that are 15 years in the future, I decided to ask you a question about the past. So here's my question. What would you if you could go back and talk to yourself 25 years ago, or pick it 20 years ago, you can pick the time. What would you tell yourself, or what do you wish that 20 years ago Seth would have needed to have known?
Yeah, I've thought about this a few times. There's a great science fiction book, one of the greatest, called Replay, that most people have never read, about time travel. On one hand, you're tempted to say to yourself, don't do a deal with that guy. He's going to turn out to be a bozo. Buy as much Google stock as you can afford, and then sell it all and buy you can go down this whole list.
Yeah, and that's literally not what I'm asking, right?
Right, exactly.
That.
But where it leads me is, I'm really happy, super lucky to have ended up where I ended up. And I ended up here because of all the mistakes I made. And I ended up here because of all the dead ends. So the only thing I would tell myself 30 years ago is, it's going to be okay. That you just need to remind yourself it's going to be okay. And I think if we can each tell ourselves that every day, we're more likely to do better work. Because if you define okay as whatever is, then it's going to be okay. And then the question is, given that it's going to be okay, what contribution could you make? Where could you extend yourself? How far over the boat could you reach? Because you're not going to get a warning from the future you about don't do that deal or, do that transaction. So since that's not going to happen, why not just live it as generously and full out as you can? Because that's the thing that makes it most likely that it's going to be okay.
And maybe a better okay, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting when you say that, because a lot of times if you think about people that are going through a tough time in their life, losing a loved one or something, and oftentimes when we look far to the future, we realize that there were good things that came from that, even though we might not have chosen that thing.
Sure.
I mean, that's it's another way of saying what you're saying about the idea that, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have done that deal, but man, I learned something. So let's talk about what advice would you give to people, or what is your thought about that idea of mistake or oops or whatever? What observation would you make about that in general?
Well, I think that there are two things that go on. The first one is the person who fails the most wins. That if you fail often enough, meaning you didn't fail so bad you got kicked out of the game, then you've learned more than other people have because they haven't experienced what you learned. And if you can, so I failed more than most people I know. I've launched more projects and more of those projects didn't work than most people I know. So I've learned more ways to not do something than most people I know. But the other half of it is don't catch yourself making the same mistake twice. Because if you start making the same mistake twice, you're being sloppy. You're being selfish. You're doing something that involves a blind spot. And so I'm working really hard to keep making new mistakes. At the same time, I try to avoid making the old mistake again.
So some people listening would say, that's fine if you're Seth Godin. That's fine if you're Kevin and it's your company. But I'm in the middle of this organization, right? I love my work and all that stuff. But how do you talk to that person who's saying that all makes sense intellectually, but I gotta live in this thing, and I've got to help my team. I'm like, how do I lead my team with that ethos?
Yeah, I love that question because I hate it so much.
I thought you might.
Because let's make a list of all the people who've been in your chair who have failed to make an impact because they played it safe, and then makes a list of all the people who did generous, honest work, failed at it, and got fired. There's almost no one on the second list. And if you do get fired, good, because they didn't deserve you anyway. And you'll have no trouble finding the next place. The history, if we look at the people who have had significant successes, pick any icon you want, the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world, and the Barry Dillers of the world, and the Bill Gates of the world, and the Jeff Bezos of the world. Massive, littered roads filled with failure. That the list of products that Bill Gates launched that failed epically is this long. And there are only this many giant wins, right?
Yeah.
So, Steve Ballmer famously said that the iPhone is a complete failure and it'll never do anything. He missed the single biggest consumer product in history. But it's not that bad to be Steve Ballmer, right? Because while he missed that, he got a whole bunch of other things right enough that he could make a difference. So I hear that noise in your head. I hear that narrative. But here's the way I put it. If you finish the Boston Marathon, you're going to be tired. And some people, when they get to mile 21, drop out. What's the difference? They're both tired. Well, the difference is the person who finishes it figures out where to put the tired. They're not a better runner. They just know where to put the tired. They don't say to their coach, teach me to run a marathon without becoming tired. They know that's impossible. Well, people like you, Kevin, who have made a ruckus, figured out where to put the fear. You can't make the fear go away, but you can put it somewhere. You can put it in a little box and take it out later. And so that's what I'm saying to this person who's asking that question, which is, yeah, I get it. You have a sinecure and you have a narrative in your head about how horrible it will be if you lose your sinecure. But that means you are guaranteed to be a wandering generality, as Zig would say, guaranteed to be the kind of person that makes little impact. And if that's what you want, great. But then don't listen to podcasts like this one.
Yeah, right. You don't listen to a podcast that has the word remarkable in it, right? How about that? So, excellent. So one of your projects that certainly from my perspective, appears to be not a failure, but working, is the Alt MBA. And I get a sense, I've not been in it, but I get a sense that everyone that's participating and listening to our conversation is getting a little taste of it. But I'd like you to tell us a little bit about what Alt MBA is and sort of what it's doing for people.
Yeah, it's the most effective thing I've ever done. And I need to start by saying I am not in it. There are no videos of me. There are no gurus. There are no lectures. If you want lectures of me, you can take the marketing seminar. You can watch YouTube. It's not expensive. The Alt MBA is different. It's 125 people in a cohort with live coaches in 45 countries around the world in real time for 30 days, doing 13 or 14 projects, sprinting like they've never sprinted, giving feedback, getting feedback, giving more feedback than you've given in your entire career, getting more feedback than you've ever gotten in your entire career, again and again and again, cycling for a month. And we've had 2,500 alums, and we have changed their lives. We have a 97% completion rate. There are almost no institutes of learning in this country where 97% of the people finish. And this thing we built it to show how education could be transformed, to be able to look people in the eye and say, if you care enough, wherever you are, we'll get you from where you are up to here. And we don't want it to be a giant scaled thing because we'd have to dumb it down. And every chance we get, we go in the other direction. So we only run it 4 times a year, and it's a very special place. But if you want to interact with me, you won't find me there because I designed it and I built it, but I built it to be bigger than me. And I resist the temptation to feed my ego by showing up and talking. And instead, we created this place where people could talk to each other. So if you're at all interested, I hope you'll check out altmba.com. We have no hard sell for you. We're full. But if it's for you, we'll find a place for you.
Perfect. Or you're doing it again. So there's always, you're doing it again. So the new book is, and you held it up for those who might be watching us, This Is Marketing. So you can do it again. For those who can't, or who are only listening, it's a beautiful orange book. It's called This Is Marketing. And I don't have it because we're recording this before it's out. I've only read it on digital, right? Which makes me a little sad, but that's okay. So tell us a little bit more about the book, This Is Marketing.
So after the Alt MBA, I made a workshop called the Marketing Workshop. And the idea was over 100 days, teach everyone what I know. And in between the lectures, lots of group work. And it worked. It transformed 6,600 people. But some people said to me, great, but I want to read a book. Great, I don't want to pay that kind of money. Great, I want to take it out of my library. I'm like, fine. I've written a book in 5 years, I'll write a book. And so I wrote it down and I evolved it and I got deeper. So this book exists to say to people, if you grew up with Kotler, if you grew up with David Ogilvy, if you grew up with Mad Men, you're going to have to set all of that aside. But if there was going to be a textbook for marketing starting now, it would be this book. And it has several really big ideas in it. The first one is this: the smallest viable audience matters more than trying to reach everybody, because mass marketing is dead. Oprah has left the building. Casey Kasem doesn't have a radio show. That you can't reach everybody. That the internet has a lot of people on it, but in lots of little silos. So pick a silo, own a silo. When I look at your work, Kevin, you, like me, are unknown to 98% of the people in the world. Fine. Because the people who do care, we care about them. So I'm not busy trying to find readers for my writing. I spend all my time doing writing for my readers. And that's freeing and leveraged and magical. That's the first idea. The second idea I'll share is no one knows what you know. No one wants what you want. No one believes what you believe. And the idea that we need to have empathy, that we cannot insist that people have the same noise in their head that we have in our head. Yep. Again, super leveraged, super freeing, because it takes you from being someone who yells at people to someone who can be a teacher.
Yeah, it makes it, we're creating conversation. And the thing I love about it, even though it's not, we'll go back to marketing versus leadership, even though it's not it's not called the leadership book, it's called the marketing book, but the idea of creating a true conversation and that piece of empathy to me is so directly connected to what it means to really lead and to have people to choose to follow, which is fundamentally what marketing is about. Hey, I like that thing. I'm going to go buy that thing. I'm going to go follow you. To me, that's so directly connected. And again, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show here was to have that conversation. So I really appreciate that. So I had the conversation last night with my daughter, who is a sophomore at the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University. I hate to say that, Seth, because I went to Purdue, so it's hard for me to say that, but she's a sophomore at the Kelley School of Business, a phenomenally good business school, and she's studying marketing. That's what she thinks.
Oh boy.
And I said, well, I'm going to have Seth on the show. She goes, well, I want to get the book. I said, well, it's coming in November, excuse me. And you'll be able to read it. And I really think, and I'm going to say this, I believe that this, because you said, this is the new textbook. This is textbooks for marketing now on. I think that's right. I think you're talking about the stuff that I hope that my daughter will learn. I'm not confident that's what they're going to teach, but I'm hopeful that's what she'll learn.
They're not going to teach her
95% of what's in the book.
Right. They might teach her niece or maybe even her daughter that's how long it takes for the cycle to go, because professors want checklists and they want things that they can verify. And so here I've written a book about being a human, as opposed to a book that explains gross rating points and how you force strangers in the world to interact with you. And it will come around because it's all that's left, and because it works. But I am under no illusion that it's going to happen in a year. And that's why there's such a significant head start to leaders and marketers who learn this new way of being in the world.
So when I think of your work, there are two other things that we haven't touched on that I think about. And I want to have you talk about those briefly, if you would. And the first of those is, you said you haven't published a book in 5 years, which I didn't really realize, but you're writing every day. So one of the things I think about when I think about you is discipline, the discipline to do the things that you care about. Can you just talk about any connection that you have to that idea, or anything you want to share about that?
Well, I think it's probably more useful to talk about intentionality than discipline. So I have enormous willpower about certain things. I don't have a television. I don't go to meetings. I haven't had a piece of meat in 25 years, but that's just me personally. That doesn't explain blogging. I blog every day because I have a purpose and an intent, a plan, a practice, an objective. And if you can be intentional, then you're not a pinball in a pinball machine. You're actually driving. You're actually causing the next thing to happen. And my advice to anyone who says they're a leader is to blog every day. Even if you do it under another name, even if you don't tell anybody. The act of going to bed at night saying, tomorrow, I'm going to write something about what I learned. Tomorrow, I'm going to make an assertion. Tomorrow, I have to write a prediction or do something generous. You will imagine something that you wouldn't have imagined if you didn't have that deadline tomorrow. And then once you've blogged every day for, 6 weeks, you'll look back at what you wrote 6 weeks ago. And that will either reinforce the path you're on or make you wake up and say, I got to get better. Right? And either one is a fine outcome.
Right on, man. Right on. So here's the other one. The other one is, and maybe there's a connection. In Linchpin, you talk about we're all shipping. We got to ship it. So so that connects to me to the idea of urgency at some level. Right. So talk about that, because I think now for that person earlier that says, listen, I'm in the middle of this organization and blah, blah, like this, they're going to definitely connect to this regardless. Hopefully they've stayed with us and are still with us, but talk about that idea before we.
Right. So I was in a documentary a couple of weeks ago, and the PA, the production assistant, came pick me up to bring me to the studio. And I'm talking to her like your daughter. She's a couple years old. She just graduated from college. I said, so what do you want to do? She says, I'm going to make documentaries. And I said, so why are you driving me around? She said, well, because I got to pay my dues and I got to work on documentaries before I can make a documentary. I said, you're not working on a documentary. You're driving me. And I said, what's keeping you from making a documentary tonight? Like, all you need to make a documentary.
You have a phone.
Is some footage and a typewriter and edit the thing on your laptop, post it on YouTube. And she was like, well, I'm just not ready. And I said, well, when will you be ready? Because driving me around more isn't going to help you get closer to being ready. So this model that says, look, I got this thing in my hand and I have to toss it some direction. Okay, then I'm going to do my best. I'll toss it over there. But if I'm allowed to hold it and hold it and hold it and hold it, I'm never going to toss it because it's risky. So that's the idea of blogging every day. That's the idea of 19 books. That's the idea of shipping the work, which is, I've never once said just ship it, because just implies what the hell. What I've said is merely ship it. Ship it without commentary to yourself. Ship it without criticizing yourself. Ship it without a whole dialogue about how you're going to fail and get fired. Simply ship it. But now that you know you got to ship it, you might as well ship something great, because you're not the kind of person that's going to ship something lousy.
And most people, at the end of the day, aren't. Most people in this world aren't that. Once they figure that out, people want to do good work, and they can do good work if they get out of their own head and get to work.
Yeah, I mean, Saturday Night Live doesn't go on at 11:30 because it's ready. It goes on because it's 11:30. And once you know that, once you can't go to Lauren and say, Lauren, can we just ship it 20 minutes late? Well, then you're going to make a better show because you know it's almost 11:30.
And the show you got's the show you got. And guess what? It's still on. And it was on when I was younger than my daughter that we're talking about. So yeah, there you go. We have a small segment of the show, Seth, that is sponsored by my newest book called The Long Distance Leader. And you can learn more about being a more effective leader at a distance by going to longdistanceleaderbook.com. So what I've got now are three words, Seth. And okay. I want you can riff and say whatever, as much or as little as you want about each of these three words. Are you ready?
Ready.
First word is selling.
Selling is the generous act of helping somebody get over their fear of change to find a new place that's even better than the one they're in.
Second word is community.
It's not your community, but you might be part of it.
Okay. And the third one is accountability.
So accountability gets to this issue of responsibility and authority. Organizations are filled with people who want authority, who use authority to manage. But responsibility gets handed out to anyone who asks for it. That if you ask for responsibility, you'll get it. And that makes you accountable. And that makes you powerful. And that gives you leverage because you're the generous person who's leading. So instead of fleeing from responsibility and accountability, I think we ought to head toward it.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. So I just have a couple more final questions for you. One is all the stuff that you're doing, and anyone who has followed you or observed you or even just paid attention to the last 25 minutes or so knows that you accomplish a lot, do a lot, have a variety of interests, et cetera. So what is it that you do for fun?
Well, the main thing I do for fun is this. For sure. I wake up in the morning and I have unlimited choices, super lucky. You know, I was in the internet in the early days. I could just sit by the beach. I would hate that. So the thing I do the most for fun is I teach. I also go up to Canada every year and teach canoeing. I'm one of the world's great canoeing instructors. I love that. I listen to my Japanese tube amplifier and jazz almost every night on my 96 dB efficient divorce speakers. And I cook. And if I can, I swim every day. So those are things I enjoy. And of course, any chance I get to spend with my family, my wife, my kids, what a treat.
There you go. And so the only question I told you I was going to ask you is this one. And so what is it that you're reading now, or something you've read recently, or what you felt led to share with us today?
Yeah. So, you know, behind me, you can see just some of my bookshelves. Scott Harrison's new book called Thirst or Thirsty just came out. I read it in galleys. It is stunning. My friend Jacqueline Novogratz wrote a book years ago called The Blue Sweater that I reread every once in a while. I have a book here on audio, one of the best audios ever. I don't know where it went, called The Art of Possibility by Ben and Roz Zander. I listen to that at least twice a year. And then maybe The War of Art by Steve Pressfield. Again, a game changer. The first time I read that book, I was working on Linchpin, and I was in this office, and I stood up and quite loudly said, "Why didn't anyone tell me about this book?" Because it had been out for 5 years, and I see a lot of books, and it had never crossed my desk. So I am paying it forward. That book changed me.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So last question, other than typing in Seth in Google, where else can people learn more about you and the work? You mentioned altmba.com. Anything else that you want to let people know about?
Well, the daily blog is seths.blog. And if you go to seths.blog/TIM, you can find out all about the new book. There's some video there and a sample chapter. And we're going to be launching a really cool surprise right in the middle of November. There's only going to be 2,000 of them. So keep an eye out for that, but I don't want to spoil it by telling you.
So right about now, because that's what
Right
this
about
is
now,
live.
as
That's
Fat Boy Slim
awesome.
would say. Right,
This is
about
why
now.
you need to be here every week,
There you
everybody.
go.
So listen, before we go, I've got to ask the question that I ask all of you as listeners every week, and then it's 2 words. Now what? What are you going to do? You got to listen to us chatter, and you got to hopefully maybe be educated. Seth says he loves to teach, and hopefully you got inspired, but it doesn't matter unless you go do something. So what from this can you take, and what will you do as a result? What triggered for you? Don't just say, hey, that was a great idea. What action will you take? That's what we hope that you'll do every week when you're here. And so Seth, thanks so much for spending some time with me and with us today. It was a pleasure to have you.
Beautifully said. The phrase I like is go make a ruckus. And clearly, Kevin, you are making a ruckus. Thank you for your leadership, sir.
It was my pleasure. And everybody, we're here every single week. And so if you're just joining us, welcome. And if you've been here for a while, keep coming back right here to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.